They say blood is thicker than water, but what they don't tell you is that sometimes blood can drown you. The champagne flute shattered against the marble floor of the Rosewood Country Club, its crystalline fragments catching the light like fallen stars. But the sound that really echoed through the grand ballroom that night wasn't the breaking glass. It was the sharp crack of my father's hand across my face, witnessed by 200 wedding guests in their finest attire. My name is Natalie Sterling, and that moment changed everything. I had built my life carefully, methodically. At 30, I was a successful software engineer with my own tech consulting firm, living in a penthouse apartment in downtown Seattle that I had saved for and purchased myself. Every piece of furniture, every carefully chosen artwork, every thread of the Egyptian cotton sheets, I had earned it all through late nights coding, weekend projects, and the kind of determination that comes from growing up in a family where love always came with conditions. The wedding was supposed to be a celebration. My younger brother Marcus was marrying his college sweetheart Sophia at one of the most exclusive venues in the Pacific Northwest. The evening had started pleasantly enough, champagne flowing, string quartet playing softly in the background, and the kind of refined conversation that my parents, Robert and Catherine Sterling, had trained us for since childhood. I was standing at the bar, taking a moment to myself, when my parents approached. They moved with the synchronized precision of two people who had spent 35 years perfecting the art of manipulation. "Natalie, sweetheart," my mother began, her voice honeyed with false warmth. "You know Marcus and Sophia are going to need that penthouse of yours to start their new life together. You're there all alone, surely you don't need all that space?" My father stepped closer, his steel-gray eyes fixed on mine with the kind of intensity that had made him successful in real estate development and terrifying as a parent. "Don't be selfish, Natalie. Family comes first. You've always known that." I felt the familiar knot form in my stomach, the same one that had appeared countless times throughout my childhood whenever they had asked me to give something up for Marcus. The piano lessons I had loved, redirected to pay for his soccer equipment. My college fund, partially diverted to cover his private school tuition after he got kicked out of public school for fighting. The internship opportunity at Microsoft that I had turned down because they needed me to help with his legal fees after a DUI incident. "I bought that apartment with my own money," I said quietly, trying to keep my voice steady. "I designed every room, chose every fixture. It's my home." "Your home?" My father's voice rose slightly, drawing glances from nearby guests. "Everything you have because of this family. Because of the opportunities we gave you, the education we provided, you owe us, and more importantly, you owe Marcus." The anger that had been simmering beneath the surface of my polite smile for 3 decades suddenly threatened to boil over. I owe him? I've been paying his debt since I was 16 and got my first job. I covered his rent when he dropped out of college the first time. I bailed him out when his cryptocurrency startup failed and left investors holding worthless tokens. I've given and given and given, and it's never enough. My mother's perfectly applied makeup couldn't hide the flash of cold calculation in her eyes. "Lower your voice. People are staring." She glanced around nervously, then leaned in closer. "We're not asking for charity, darling. We're asking for family loyalty, something you seem to have forgotten." "I haven't forgotten anything," I replied, setting down my champagne glass with deliberate care. "I remember every sacrifice I made, every time I put Marcus's needs before my own, every time you told me that being a good sister meant being invisible so he could shine. But I'm done being invisible." That's when my father's control snapped. His hand moved so fast I barely saw it coming. The slap echoed through the ballroom like a gunshot, instantly silencing conversations at nearby tables. My cheek burned, and I could taste blood where my teeth had cut the inside of my mouth. The silence that followed was deafening. 200 guests, business associates, family friends, distant relatives, all staring at us with a mixture of shock and uncomfortable fascination. My mother's face had gone pale beneath her foundation, and I could see her mentally calculating the social damage this scene would cause. Marcus, resplendent in his designer tuxedo at the head table, wasn't rushing to my defense. Instead, he was smirking, actually smirking, as if my humiliation was just another form of entertainment. I touched my lip, and my fingers came away bloody. In that moment, something inside me crystallized, hardening into a resolve I had never felt before. I looked around the room, meeting the eyes of the witnesses to my degradation, then turned back to my parents. "You're going to regret this," I said, my voice carrying clearly in the stunned silence. "All of you." I walked out of that ballroom with my head held high, my heels clicking against the marble floor like a countdown to Judgment Day. No one tried to stop me. No one followed. They just watched me go, probably assuming I would cool down and come crawling back like I always had before. They were wrong. I didn't go home to my penthouse that night. Instead, I drove to Café Grind, a small coffee shop in the Capitol Hill neighborhood where I had spent countless late nights during my early days as a freelance developer. The owner, Ben, was a former programmer himself, who had traded code for coffee beans. He took one look at my tear-streaked makeup and bruised face and wordlessly handed me a large black coffee and a blueberry muffin. "On the house," he said simply, then left me alone at my usual corner table. I opened my laptop and began to work, not on client projects, but on something far more important: my future. By sunrise, I had made 3 phone calls that would change everything. The first was to my lawyer, Sarah Chen, one of the most ruthless corporate attorneys in Seattle. I had helped her law firm upgrade their entire IT infrastructure 2 years earlier, and she owed me a favor. I scheduled an emergency meeting for Monday morning. The second call was to my bank, requesting an immediate audit of all my accounts and investments. What my family didn't know was that I had been very, very good at saving money, and even better at investing it. While they assumed I was just getting by on my consulting fees, I had quietly built a portfolio worth more than they could imagine. The third call was the most important. I contacted Sterling Properties Management, the company that handled rentals for several high-end apartment complexes in Seattle, including the one where Marcus and Sophia had just signed a lease for their dream apartment. What they didn't know was that I had been quietly buying up real estate through a series of shell companies for the past 5 years, including their building. Monday morning came faster than expected. I met Sarah at her downtown office, a gleaming tower that looked out over Elliott Bay. She listened without interruption as I explained what had happened, what I had discovered about Marcus's failed business ventures, and what I wanted to do about it. "You want to evict your brother?" she asked, raising an eyebrow. "I want to enforce the terms of a legal lease agreement," I corrected. "Marcus has been 3 months behind on rent, and his previous landlord was willing to overlook it because of my father's influence." "I'm not." Sarah smiled, and it wasn't a particularly pleasant expression. "I like it. Clean, legal, and completely devastating. What else?" I opened my briefcase and pulled out a thick folder. "I've been doing some digging into Marcus's cryptocurrency company, Stellar Digital. Turns out he wasn't just incompetent, he was fraudulent. Fake partnerships, inflated user numbers, misrepresented technology capabilities. The SEC would be very interested in this information." "And your father's involvement?" "Sterling Development provided the seed funding and served as the primary consultant for Stellar Digital's real estate investments. If I report the fraud, his company gets dragged into the investigation." I leaned back in my chair, feeling strangely calm. "I'm not interested in destroying anyone, Sarah. I just want to be left alone. But if they continue to harass me about the penthouse or try to manipulate me into financing Marcus's lifestyle, then I'll do whatever it takes to protect myself." Sarah nodded approvingly. "I'll draft the eviction notice today, and I'll prepare the SEC complaint as well, just in case. How do you want to handle contact with your family?" "All communication goes through you from now on. I'm done talking to them directly." The next few weeks were a masterclass in the difference between reacting and responding. My family's initial attempts at contact were predictable: angry voicemails from my father, tearful messages from my mother, and increasingly desperate texts from Marcus as his financial situation became clear. When the eviction notice arrived, my father showed up at my penthouse building. The doorman called up, and I simply instructed him that Robert Sterling was not on my approved visitor list and should be asked to leave. When my father refused, building security escorted him out. My mother tried a different approach, attempting to ambush me at my favorite yoga studio. I calmly informed the instructor that I was being harassed by a family member, and would she please call the police if the woman didn't leave me alone. My mother left quickly, unwilling to risk the public embarrassment. Marcus's eviction proceeded exactly as scheduled. When he called Sarah's office claiming that I couldn't legally evict him because we were family, Sarah politely informed him that blood relation provided no exemption from rental law, and that his rent was now 4 months overdue. But the real revelation came when I decided to dig deeper into my family's finances. What I found shocked me, even though I thought I was prepared for anything. My father's company, Sterling Development, was in serious trouble. They had overleveraged themselves on several projects, and Marcus's failed cryptocurrency venture had been a desperate attempt to generate quick capital. When that collapsed, they had been quietly liquidating assets and taking out loans against properties they didn't fully own. More disturbing was the evidence I found of systematic financial manipulation within my own family. Over the years, my parents had been slowly draining a trust fund that had been established for me by my grandmother before she died. They had used my social security number to open credit cards, which they had maxed out and paid minimum balances on for years. They had even taken out a second mortgage on their home using me as a co-signer, a signature they had forged. I sat in my penthouse office, surrounded by financial documents and legal papers, and felt a strange sense of clarity. This wasn't just about a slap at a wedding anymore. This was about a lifetime of financial abuse, emotional manipulation, and systematic exploitation. They hadn't just treated me as less important than Marcus, they had literally stolen from me to support his failures. I called Sarah immediately. "I need to file charges," I said without preamble. "Identity theft, fraud, forgery, everything we can prove." "Are you sure?" Sarah asked. "Once we start down this path, there's no going back. Your family relationships will be permanently severed. I looked around my beautiful apartment, every piece carefully chosen and paid for with money I had earned through my own hard work. I thought about the years I had spent feeling guilty for wanting things for myself, for not being satisfied with being the invisible daughter who existed only to support her brother's dreams. What relationship? I asked. They never saw me as a daughter or sister. They saw me as a resource to be managed and exploited. I'm done being their personal ATM. The legal process moved faster than I expected. Within 2 weeks, the FBI's Financial Crimes Unit had opened an investigation. The evidence was overwhelming: years of forged documents, unauthorized use of my credit, and systematic theft from my trust fund. My parents had been so confident in their control over me that they had barely bothered to cover their tracks. Marcus was the first to break. Faced with potential federal charges for securities fraud, he agreed to cooperate with investigators in exchange for a reduced sentence. The details he provided painted an even uglier picture of my family's financial desperation and willingness to sacrifice me to save themselves. My father's company collapsed within a month. The investigation revealed that Sterling Development owed millions to investors and contractors, and my father was forced to declare bankruptcy. Their house, cars, and all their assets were seized to pay creditors. But the moment that will stay with me forever came 6 months later, when my parents showed up at my building one last time. The doorman called up, and instead of having them removed, I decided to see them. They looked older, smaller somehow. My father's arrogance had been replaced by a desperate humility that might have been touching if it weren't 20 years too late. My mother's designer clothes had been replaced by department store basics, and her perfectly styled hair showed gray roots she couldn't afford to cover. "We've lost everything," my father said without preamble. "The house, the business, our reputation. Marcus is going to prison. Your mother and I are living in a one-bedroom apartment in Tacoma." "I know," I replied simply. "You destroyed us," my mother accused, though her voice lacked its usual venom. "We're your family. We raised you, loved you, gave you everything." "You gave me nothing," I said, my voice steady and calm. "You took my childhood, my self-worth, my money, and my identity. You forged my name on legal documents and stole from my trust fund. You slapped me in public when I finally stood up for myself. The only thing you ever gave me was the motivation to build a life without you." My father seemed to crumble before my eyes. "What do you want from us? An apology? We're sorry. We're so sorry. We didn't know how to handle Marcus. He needed so much help, and you were always so strong, so independent. We thought you could take care of yourself." "You're right," I said. "I can take care of myself. I always could. The problem was that I spent 30 years taking care of all of you instead." They left that day, and I never saw them again. A year later, I learned that my mother had died of a heart attack, likely brought on by the stress of their financial ruin. My father sent one last message through Sarah, asking if I would pay for the funeral. I declined. Some people might think that makes me heartless. But I had grieved for my family years ago. I had grieved for the parents I never had, the unconditional love I never received, the childhood stolen to support my brother's endless needs. By the time my mother died, I had already mourned what we never were and celebrated what I had become. Today, 5 years later, I'm sitting on the balcony of a beach house I bought on Whidbey Island, watching the sunset paint the Puget Sound in shades of gold and crimson. The house is smaller than my penthouse, but it's perfect for me: light-filled rooms, a garden where I grow vegetables, and enough space for the rescue dogs I've adopted. My tech consulting business has grown beyond my wildest dreams. I specialize in helping small companies protect themselves from financial fraud. Perhaps not surprisingly, I've become something of an expert in identifying the warning signs of embezzlement and identity theft. I speak at conferences, write articles for industry publications, and have even testified before Congress about the need for stronger protections against family financial abuse. I'm not alone either. Ben from Cafe Grind and I started dating 2 years ago, after months of him leaving little notes with my coffee orders that made me laugh. He's nothing like the men my parents would have chosen for me: no MBA, no trust fund, no family connections. He's just kind, honest, and completely unimpressed by wealth or status. He loves me for exactly who I am, not who I could be useful as. Sarah has become one of my closest friends, and together we've started a foundation that provides legal assistance to victims of family financial abuse. We've helped hundreds of people break free from toxic relationships and rebuild their lives. Each success story feels like a small victory against the system that nearly destroyed me. I won't lie and say that I never think about my family. Sometimes I wonder what Marcus is doing now that he's out of prison, or whether my father ever really understood what he had done wrong. But these thoughts come less frequently now, and when they do, they don't carry the weight of guilt or regret that they once did. The truth is, losing my family was the best thing that ever happened to me. In trying to take away the one thing I had built for myself, my home, they forced me to realize that I was worth more than their approval. In stealing from me, they taught me the value of protecting what I had earned. In abandoning me when I needed them most, they showed me the difference between people who love you and people who use you. I keep in touch with my grandmother's sister, Aunt Helen, who reached out after learning about the family scandal through mutual friends. She's in her 80s now, but sharp as ever, and she had some interesting stories to tell about my father's childhood and my grandmother's concerns about his character. Your grandmother left that trust fund specifically for you, Aunt Helen told me over tea last Christmas. She was worried about what would happen when she was gone, worried that Robert would try to control you the way he had controlled her. She made me promise to look out for you, but I was living in Boston then, and I thought your parents would do right by you. I should have intervened sooner. You couldn't have known, I assured her. And besides, I needed to find my own strength. If someone had rescued me earlier, I might never have learned that I could rescue myself. These days, I measure my success not in dollars or professional achievements, but in peace. I sleep well at night. I make decisions based on what I want, not what others expect from me. I have relationships built on mutual respect and genuine affection, not obligation and manipulation. Last month, I was invited to speak at a conference for adult children of narcissistic parents. As I stood at the podium, looking out at an audience of people who understood the particular pain of being raised by parents who saw them as extensions of themselves rather than separate individuals, I felt a profound sense of gratitude. The hardest thing about breaking free from a toxic family, I told them, isn't the practical challenges or even the emotional pain. It's giving yourself permission to prioritize your own well-being. We're conditioned from childhood to believe that family loyalty means self-sacrifice, that love requires us to set ourselves on fire to keep others warm. But real love, the kind worth having, doesn't demand that you disappear. After my speech, a young woman approached me, tears in her eyes. She couldn't have been more than 25, with the same exhausted expression I remembered seeing in my own mirror for years. I'm supposed to give my inheritance to my brother for his business, she said quietly. My parents say it's only fair because he has children and I don't, but it's my money, from my grandfather who specifically left it to me. Does that make me selfish? I took her hands in mine, remembering another young woman who had asked herself the same question while standing in a wedding reception, tasting blood and making a choice that would change everything. No, I said firmly. It makes you smart. Your grandfather left that money to you for a reason. Honor his wishes and honor yourself. The people who truly love you will find a way to support themselves without demanding that you sacrifice your future. As I drove home that evening, winding along the coastal highway toward my little house by the water, I thought about how different my life might have been if I had continued to accept my family's treatment as normal. I would probably still be living in that penthouse, successful but hollow, writing checks to cover Marcus's latest failure while my parents planned how to extract more resources from their convenient daughter. Instead, I'm here, in a life I built from scratch after burning down everything that came before. It wasn't easy, and there were times in those first few months when the loneliness felt overwhelming. But loneliness, I discovered, was infinitely preferable to being surrounded by people who saw me only as a means to an end. The dogs greet me at the door, 2 golden retrievers named Justice and Liberty, because I apparently have a sense of humor about my dramatic life story. They don't care about my trust fund or my professional achievements or my family drama. They just want dinner and belly rubs and the occasional walk on the beach. As I settle into my favorite chair with a cup of tea and watch the last light fade from the sky, I realize that this is what victory looks like. Not revenge, though there was certainly an element of justice in watching my abusers face consequences for their actions. Not wealth, though financial security has given me choices I never had before. Victory looks like peace. It looks like Sunday morning breakfast on the deck without checking my phone for angry messages. It looks like relationships where I can be myself without calculating what the other person wants from me. It looks like going to bed each night knowing that tomorrow I'll wake up in a home that truly belongs to me, surrounded by people and creatures who value me for who I am, not what I can provide. Sometimes I imagine what my younger self would think if she could see me now. That girl who spent her 16th birthday working at a grocery store to earn money for Marcus's car insurance, who gave up her spring break plans to help him study for his college entrance exams, who believed that being needed was the same as being loved. I think she would be amazed not just by the beach house or the successful business, but by the simple fact that I can sit quietly with my own thoughts without feeling guilty about not doing something for someone else. That I can spend money on things I enjoy without justifying the expense to anyone. That I can make plans for my future that center entirely on my own dreams and goals. The girl I used to be lived in a constant state of emergency, always ready to drop everything to solve someone else's crisis. The woman I've become understands that other people's emergencies are not automatically her responsibilities, and that saying no to others often means saying yes to herself. It took me 30 years to learn that lesson, and it cost me a family. But as I sit here in the gathering darkness, listening to the gentle sound of waves against the shore and feeling genuinely content for perhaps the first time in my life, I know it was worth every difficult moment of the journey. The sound of breaking glass that night at the country club wasn't just a champagne flute hitting the floor. It was the sound of a woman finally shattering the invisible chains that had bound her to a life of quiet desperation. It was the sound of freedom beginning, even though I didn't recognize it at the time. They say you can't choose your family, but that's not entirely true. You can choose to stop letting them choose your life. You can choose to build something better, even if you have to build it alone. And sometimes, if you're very lucky, you'll discover that the family you create for yourself is everything the family you were born into never was. The champagne glass broke that night, but I didn't, and in the end, that made all the difference.